I see it now how I created that people pleasing around them because I would wear one mask with them and I would wear a different mask when I was with the other crowd and another mask when I was at home. So just kind of overthinking and stressing because just trying to find that acceptance. I started experiencing suicide thoughts, suicidal, more than ideation, where I wanted to die.
And so you said that that led you to thinking about taking your life. So you were willing to take your life over $52. Is that correct?
Over $52. That's correct.
Wow.
I literally wanted to die over $52.
Have you ever dressed a certain way because you thought the people that you were going to be with wanted you to dress that way? Have you ever talked a certain way, used profanity, told dirty jokes, attended a party, drank a drink, took a pill, smoked a joint, just to fit into a particular crowd of friends? Have you ever lived a certain lifestyle, made decisions that impacted your life all because you wanted to be accepted? What happens when the group that you are trying to impress is not impressed and rejects you? Is their acceptance so important that if they reject you, it changes the way you view yourself? It changes the way you feel about who you are, and it even impacts your desire to live. We call this people pleasing, and it can lead us into darkness. How does a person change their perspective, and how does a person change the way that they see themselves and have confidence in who they really are? These are the topics that I want to discuss today as my guest shares his life change story with us. I'm Eric Hutchinson, and this is the If Nothing Changes podcast. My new friend is zooming in all the way from Arizona. So welcome, friend. Why don't you introduce yourself to the listeners?
Hey everyone, Domingo here. I'm a grateful believer in Jesus Christ, and I'm in recovery because I'm actually a product of a dysfunctional family. You see, I struggle with depression and just that overall fear of not being liked by people. So I'm really excited just to be here.
Well, Domingo, thank you so much for coming. I can't wait to hear your story. So why don't you start off, just like every story has a beginning, why don't you start off and tell us where you were born and where you were raised?
Absolutely. I was born and raised in Orange County, California, also known as Southern California, SoCal. The city's called Santana, California, also known as Santa Ana.
So how many siblings do you have, and were you close to your siblings?
I'm the oldest of three, and then from the middle child, I'm 4 years older, and then from the youngest, I'm 9 years older. So yes, growing up in a household of Hispanics, we were just known to just be really, really close. So we were a tight-knit group.
So was your mom and dad both a part of your family or not?
Both my parents were part of the family up to the age of 12. That's when they got a divorce, and it became kind of like two different families.
Did you put any blame upon yourself? I mean, or how did that divorce impact you?
It impacted me tremendously because I had my father's name. I look similar to my father. So I tried my best to live up to my father's expectations, but my dad was a rancher from Mexico. But me being a kid, I struggled being in the ranch because I was a city kid and I liked technology and I didn't experience that at the ranch. So because of that, I always struggled kind of connecting with my father. So I felt like I didn't live up to his expectations. And then when we had the decisions of which parent we wanted to move into, and I move into my mom, my dad would always kind of not necessarily tease me, but he would always kind of mention it to me how I favored my mom over him. So I struggle with that too, because, I felt like growing up, my mom was around for certain life events, certain awards, or even sickness, but my dad wasn't. As an adult, I see it now like maybe he wasn't able to take the time off, but at the time I grew up with an anger and resentment towards my father because he wasn't around.
So was religion or faith a part of your upbringing? Did you go to church? Was any of that a part of your childhood?
Yes, so it was religion. So Spanish was my first language. So every Sunday we would go to church and we would attend Spanish service. So I could memorize the service order because I couldn't wait to get out of there because I really didn't understand what I was participating, but I just knew it was like about an hour and a half. And I knew there was, in order to do certain stuff, I had to recite prayers or even just go through the process of not the baptisms, but of first communion. But if in order for like my sisters, in order for them to have a quinceanera, they even had to go even further. They had to go through their confirmation, which luckily for me, I didn't have to go through that step.
So, were you the typical older brother? Were you outgoing or were you more shy?
So it started off by being outgoing, but I struggled just to always fit in different places because growing up in the 80s, I always loved watching wrestling. So I looked for people that liked wrestling or even just shows like Knight Riders or Chips. I just remember, proudly telling others in public, like, I like wrestling, and then how people would just kind of ridicule and kind of laugh at me. So then from trying to be that cool kid, I started becoming that shy kid that just was scared to kind of express myself in public.
Do you recognize any dysfunctions in your family growing up?
Yeah, some of the dysfunctions I would recognize is I always struggled with looking at people in their eyes. And it's just because how my dad used to always say, we don't look at people in their eyes. And it was kind of like that servant mentality type of deal. And he would always kind of say, take care of your job. But for him, taking care of your job was kind of like leading up to people pleasing and not having boundaries. But it was one of those that I thought life honestly was just normal. But my dad was just would always say, this is how life was in Mexico. But growing up in California and in the States, it was different. And that's where I would always tell him, like, what you're saying and what you're painting is different than what I'm seeing and I'm experiencing. Also, because I struggled with reading and writing, Hooked on Phonics didn't work on me, even though they tried. So I struggled with schooling in general. So I tried to find acceptance in different ways because I didn't get the grades that I was expected to get, and I didn't feel that I deserved to be there because it just didn't click for me.
So, would you say you had a low self esteem as you went into adolescence?
Yes, very low self-esteem. Just because, the people I hung around with weren't the best ones. And I knew it, but I didn't feel acceptance with the smart kids, and I really didn't understand what they were doing too. So I was the kid that they would pull out of class and they would have somebody read to them or actually start pronouncing different words. So it really just affected me like emotionally, and then it affected me with my self-worth and self-esteem. So a lot of the teachers and helpers were always just like there wasn't any hope for me.
So, where did that line of thinking get you whenever you got into adolescence and junior high, high school? Did that push you into unhealthy behavior at all, or how did that thinking get you in high school?
So because of all that, then that actually made me further into people pleasing, where I started kind of making fun of myself. I started being picking on myself, being harsh on myself, like more than that class clown, because that made other people, you would say the bad crowd accepted me, but those bad crowd hung out with me. They actually were my friends. So because of that, then I guess you would say I started making bad decisions. And because of those bad decisions, it affected me not only throughout my junior high experience, but also going into my high school experience.
So, did you have some substance abuse or any of that sort of thing with the people that you were hanging out with in high school?
Yeah, so first we tried the drinking, then we also tried marijuana. So we always thought that if people were telling us not to do it, then it was going to be cool. But then I also noticed that while we were in high school, the drugs were getting stronger because now, what started off from smoking, now we're at the ditching parties, we're at the ravings, at the raves, we're at the parties that we shouldn't be at a young age. And at that point, I'm just honestly just trying to fit in. So it was one of those going into it. I knew it was bad, but after a couple of minutes, honestly, I just didn't care because I was just happy just to be out and I was just happy just to have people hang out with.
So, if you had to pick one thing, what would you say the most difficult thing was growing up as a child? What was your most difficult struggle?
The most difficult struggle was just being comfortable, just being myself. I felt like I would wear so many different masks because I would just be scared just to be with others. So, like, what I mean by being others is being truly myself. So my mom would introduce me to different type of music. So like for an example, I would love listening to, let's say, Barry Manilow and sometimes even Beach Boys. But if I listened to that around my friends, I would get ridiculed and I would get laughed at. So then I was listening to the music that was considered accepted or popular. So then I felt like I see it now how I created that people pleasing around them because I would wear one mask with them and then I would wear a different mask when I was with the other crowd and another mask when I was at home. So just kind of overthinking and stressing because just trying to find that acceptance and not knowing how to turn it off or even how to cope was just hard because people would always tell me it was all in my head, but I felt like it was more than was in my head.
So whenever you got out of high school, and I'm making the assumption, did you graduate high school? And if you did you go right into the workforce and start working, or did you go to college?
I had the opportunity to go to a local college. I had a scholarship for being a first generation to have an opportunity to go to college, but I declined it just because everything growing up was always about making money and kind of helping out. So when I went after high school, didn't go to college, I found new friends. These guys were always talking about working hard, playing hard, and always impressing, that in this case it was the gals, and then just living way above our means and just always waiting for the next check, next score to make it happen.
Was God a part of your life whenever you were in your 20s? I mean, did you still go to church? I mean, were there any God moments in your life?
So I stopped following God after the age of 14. It just wasn't cool. So was God part of the life? No, no. During the early 20s, I mean, God wasn't part of my life probably up to the age of 32. And that's because work was my life. And because work was my life, having a career was my God. And making sure that, I reached that next level, that next career status, then that's all my focus and my energy and time was devoted to. And after being in California, I moved out here to Phoenix, Arizona back in 2001. So then coming out here, I saw this retail company. And after seeing this retail company and understanding how it was growing up and who they were, I kind of worked my way from being a warehouse employee, sales rep, and selling appliances to being in a leadership role. So it was one of those where I went from one location, helped clean it up, help turn it around, become profitable. Then I got assigned to another store. Then I got assigned to a third store, fourth store. So when I was assigned to my final store, which was in a really nice area out in Chandler, Arizona, and at the time this store was about 60 million in revenue, I felt like I had made it because everything that everybody was talking about was I was about to start experiencing it. And it took me about I would say about almost 14 years because everybody said by the time you're at this age, this is what you should have, this is what you should be earning, this is what you should be doing. And for me, they weren't really explaining, but it was just glorious if I'm able to check all that stuff off.
So, what would you say your identity was during that time period in life? We talk in Celebrate Recovery a lot about our identity and who we are. Who did you think that you were during that time?
During that time, I felt like I was God.
So,
Be-
what led you to God?
Yeah, so pretty much what happened was after I achieved everything, and after I'm like, I have this, and I would tell my wife, we have a house, we're not, we're doing good, we're not living on the streets. But then I knew behind closed door, I was still struggling sleeping. I was still struggling with that people pleasing. I was working 6 to 7 days, 10 to 12 hours. So for me, that downfall was being accused of a crime that I didn't commit. And because I didn't commit it, I felt like my reputation was at line. And now because of everything that I worked for, I felt like my integrity was being questioned. And because everything was being questioned, I was trying to prove myself, but nobody listened. So I felt like everybody turned their back on me. And it literally happened overnight. So I started experiencing suicide thoughts, suicidal, more than ideation, where I wanted to die because I felt like even though as bottom as I was still trying to figure out how to get my foot back in the door, how to prove to them that I didn't do what they're accusing me of, and how for they can rectify it so they can not only see it, but also in my head they were going to apologize and embrace me with loving arms and say it was just a misunderstanding. I mean, that's the stuff that was going through my mind.
You said that you were accused of some things that either you didn't do or you were trying to convince others that you didn't do. Do you mind sharing? What were you accused of, lying or stealing, or what was going on, and what led you to that darkness?
Yeah, so I was accused of theft. And even though people were, willing to write character letters and say, I've known this guy XYZ, but it was just that my number was used, even though there was no footage and there literally wasn't proof, but it was just because I was the closing manager and my number was used. So it was the interesting part where what I was being accused of was $52. And even though I would tell them that being the closing manager, I had codes to the safe, and if I wanted to, there was more than $52, they just would not listen.
And so you said that led you to thinking about taking your life. So you were willing to take your life over $52. Is that correct?
Over $52. And at the time, I'm like, I wasn't thinking of $52. I was thinking of the 14-year career. And I was like, I've been here for this long and they don't believe me. And how dare they? And I was going through like this motion of grief where then I would start crying and be like, I let them down. I let the employees down. They don't. And then I went through a motion of being anger, like they did this to me, and went through all this. It was just it's interesting to be able to laugh about it now, but back then, over $52. That's correct.
Wow.
I literally wanted to die over $52.
So did you actually try to take your life? And if you did, how did God intervene?
So pretty much, did I try to take my I told the people that were monitoring me and watching me what I was going through. So then I started to experience suicidal watch. I made a phone call. I reached out to my mom. I told my mom, I'm sorry, I let you down. This is what happened. At the time, my mom was in entering recovery, had just joined her Celebrate Recovery group. So even though we're in different states, she reached out to her ministry leader. Her ministry leader sent me this care package. I received 3 books. One was called the Life Recovery Bible. Second was the daily devotional for the 365 days for Celebrate Recovery. Third book, this short read called Your First Steps to Celebrate Recovery.
So did you start attending a Celebrate Recovery, or did you start going to groups and open share and that kind of thing? I mean, is that where things started to turn for you?
Yeah, so I entered my first Celebrate Recovery meeting July 11, 2014, and I was scared and I was nervous. But the interesting part was, even though nobody in there looked like me, sounded like me, or even had similar my background, everybody was just so nice and welcoming, and they had something that I didn't have, and they just looked there at peace.
So principle 3 says consciously choose to commit all my life and will to Christ's care and control. And many people come to the Lord then, and some people would say that that's where they gave their life over to God as their Lord. Did you give your life to God during your CR, your Celebrate Recovery experience, or would you say that you were already a Christian?
I would say I gave it through my CR experience, but I called my uncle right afterwards. And my uncle was telling me that he was proud of me, and he was telling me to write down that feeling because I was just crying, and I was just telling him that I was thankful for him, that even though he introduced it to me when I was a kid, it wasn't clicking. But going through this as an adult and going through my own recovery journey, I remember when he was there, and I remembered some of those experiences kind of leading up to it.
So during your step study, and we say this a lot in Celebrate Recovery, that, inventory is one of the most difficult things that we go through. What did you learn through that inventory process?
And that inventory is that I was the one that had problems. That I was the one that used different types of coping mechanisms. I was the one that was more of the blamer, and because of that, I was stuck living in that victim's mentality. So with me going into my step study, it was one of those, I'm having a bad life because of what my father did towards me. At the end of that step study, it was more like my dad did the best that he could with what he knew at the time, but I made worse decisions on my own, knowing what I shouldn't be doing, and I just did it just to do it.
So whenever you graduated your first step study, did you feel like that your identity had changed? And what is your identity?
So that layers, it just came off because I started accepting my name Domingo. My entire retail career has always been known as Jesse. Jesse was this person who was never hurt. Jesse was this person that had this clean state baggage. Jesse was this guy from Uncle Jesse from Full House who I thought was cool. And Jesse came from an abbreviation of my middle name, which is Jesus. So Jesse was considered the American version. So I started telling people, call me Domingo. I started introducing to myself, and my identity became more through Christ. And I started realizing that some of my imperfections and some of my greatest weakness became my biggest strengths by talking about it and being open and honest and admitting to people like, yes, I struggle with fear, stress, anxiety, people pleasing, depression, including porn, living in a fantasy life. And a lot of this different stuff was just because I didn't know how to cope. And at the same time, when I knew how to cope, I still didn't know how to turn it off. God has given me this newfound freedom and this newfound acceptance where it's okay not to be okay, and to understand not only this new life that with freedom and healing, but also boundaries and knowing that it's a marathon, not necessarily a sprint. And then also being a part of this network of anyone. I love Celebrate Recovery. At the same time, there's a lot of people that I meet outside the Celebrate Recovery walls, where people like me that either haven't experienced the church or haven't experienced who God is. So, my life verse is really First Peter 5:7, cast all your worries on him because he cares for you. And so for me, it was just casting just everything to him. And I really said it, when I entered recovery, God, if you help me and if you just help me turn this around and give me a new life, I'll just go wherever you need me and I'll preach to whoever you need me to, because it's one of those that I'm more scared of going to my old life and how that was without God.
So Domingo, what have you learned about people pleasing?
So why did I spend so many years of my life? Why did I spend so much energy impressing the people in high school that I don't talk to anymore? Why did I spend so much money wearing ridiculous clothes to impress people at the parties that don't even know me anymore and I don't even remember them? All these different layers that I spent, that I could have just realizing not only who God was, but really understanding who Jesus Christ is and living out Philippians 4:13, that I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me.
So what's the one message that you want to give listeners that are hearing your story today?
The one message I would say is, I'm not sure what you're going through, but there is hope. I went from someone that I just struggled with trying to understand life and trying to understand my calling and purpose. And I found it by spending time with Jesus Christ. I realized that it was about having a relationship and more than just religion. I can tell you how I know Jesus because he lives inside of me.
Thanks, Domingo, for sharing your story with us. Hey, if you are listening today and you are basing your identity on what others think of you, maybe you have made some poor choices based on what you think others want you to do. Maybe you have an identity crisis. Maybe you need a new identity. Jesus Christ can change your identity and change your life permanently, just like he did for Domingo. However, if nothing changes, nothing changes. See you next time.
Thank you, Eric. One thing I wanted to just share as we wrap it up, just because I mentioned what happened to me at retail, right after, during my step study, the retail company that accused me sent me a check for $52.
Oh, really?
At that point, my sponsor was like, that's the Lord. Forget about it. You're already out. Just keep moving. I remember just kind of laughing about it and then kind of telling everybody what you said. I literally wanted to die over $52.
Wow.
Thank you for letting me share.
Hey, if you are still listening and you liked this podcast, I want to encourage you to listen to previous episodes because they will help to inspire change in your life. Also, if you like what you hear, please leave a positive review because it helps to bring this podcast to others. But no matter what, may God bless you and may God bring positive change to your life.